Okay.
Okay. It's going to take a while for my computer to come up. So, Bayes' theorem, I'll just read a quote here from my book, which is Peter Norvig's massive tome, Artificial Intelligence, A Modern Approach. And
Did you write that?
no, Peter Norvig wrote it.
Oh, sorry.
It's yours.
My book.
I own this copy, and I've actually read it as well.
So which
Well
decade
done.
was it from? Because artificial intelligence lives by decade.
This is the 2002 edition. There was a
Right.
more recent edition in 2009.
That's too early 2000s.
Yeah.
Is that like the
whatever.
Bible of AI?
Yeah, so
No.
this Stanford course that was mentioned it's being used as a textbook for that,
Canonical text.
and also quite a few other leading universities use it as a text as well. It's a little bit sorry.
Monash.
Yeah, and it's kind of doesn't really have much competition as a general overview of AI, but he makes the comment, just talking about Bayes' theorem, that there is in essence just one learning algorithm, that is the inference algorithm for Bayesian networks. So Bayesianism is really at the core of artificial intelligence, and it's been responsible for a lot of the progress in AI over the last few years. Also, I'd argue Bayes' rule, particularly, I'll show you some slides soon, but probabilistic robotics, Markov methods, it just goes on and on and on. All these methods are around dealing with a world of uncertainty, and Bayes' rule is the fundamental principle for how you update your beliefs in the face of new knowledge or new information in the face of uncertainty. So as well as being very useful in AI and therefore being relevant to singularity, Bayes' rule is also quite useful in real life. And if my computer ever boots up, I'll be able to show you some examples in real life where people haven't applied it with somewhat disastrous consequences. So we'll just kick off. We've got a good. You may have seen this one before. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of having a medical test come back with a bad result, but you've just been told this that the test for cancer has come back as a positive for you. Now, in your population group, the risk of any given person who takes the test having cancer is about 1%. And you've had a positive result, and the test is 90% accurate. Okay?
It's a false positives or false negatives.
But it's either. So if you've got cancer, 9 times out of 10, he'll tell you you've got cancer. 1 time out of 10 will tell you that you don't.
Right.
If you haven't got cancer,
But that
9
makes,
times.
that makes false negatives much more likely than false
Okay,
positives.
well, we'll get to that. So what I want you to do is just have a think for a minute. If you've seen this before, well and good, but have a think about what do you think is the likelihood that you have cancer, given all this information.
1 in 10.
Have a think.
Or you've got a 1%,
Okay.
1% risk.
No, but
Okay, but now you've had a positive result,
Oh, I
and the
see.
test is
Oh,
90%
okay.
accurate. So you're a fairly sophisticated audience. And sorry?
0081, something like
Okay, so
that.
The limits of accuracy 10%.
most people would tell you, well, it's a 90% accurate test, and therefore you've got a 90% chance of having cancer. But the reality is it's about 8.3%. That's interesting. So, and I'll just go through, and this is probably the key thing of this talk, is you've got 1,000 people, of which 1% have cancer. So we've got 10 with cancer. And we've got 990 do not have cancer. Of the 10 with cancer, it's 90% accurate, so we'll have 9 with a positive test, and we'll have 1 with a negative test. Of the 990 without cancer, we will have 99 with a positive test, because it gives the wrong result 10% of the time, and we'll give 891 with a negative test.
So it's 9 out of 108.
So, of the people who have a positive test, those are the two groups, and you can see 99 of them do not have cancer, and 9 of them do. So your odds are about a bit under 1 in 10 of actually having cancer.
Nine in 180.
So that's assuming it's a blind test. In other words, somebody walked in, the doctor said, hey, I'll give you this test for cancer.
Yeah, so this assumes, for example, you just have a general screening test. Now, if you come in coughing up blood, and blah, 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 that is other information that would need to be taken into account. That is other prior information. So in that case, the doctor may say, look, of the patients I've had who come in coughing up blood, a third of them turn out to have cancer. So your 1% would be 30%. So that you plug a different number into the process.
My objection to these statistics is some people have used these not to take treatments because they say, oh, well, in reality, they give all this Bayesian maths.
Can you just show me where the denominator and numerator for your 8.3% are?
Yeah, it's 9 out of 108.
Out of 89 plus 9.
No, 99 plus.
This is the chance of
99,
actually having cancer.
It's 108,
9 over 108.
which is 1 out of 12, which is 8.3%.
So you get a positive.
And it's pretty reliable. Like, not a lot of tests are a lot worse than this.
So there's a 11 out of 12 chance that you don't have
You do
cancer.
not have cancer. So this is
11
one
out
of
of
the problems
12,
with
even if you
these.
get a positive test.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the problems with these mass screening programs, is they generate lots of frightened people who don't have anything wrong with them.
Well, what's the
Prostate cancer screening.
money and frightened people?
It's all good. Okay. So I don't know what's happened to my PC, but I'll just have to go by memory a bit here on some of the other things I was going to raise. So let's look at some scenarios where there is actually a formula for this.
It's so counterintuitive.
It is,
Yeah.
and you need to go through, like, I've had to go through this like many times before. Eventually it becomes intuitive, but it's against the grain. So
That'd be a good introductory lesson to maths at the start of high school, which gives people some incentive to learn maths.
yeah. So let me give you another example. All right, the Innocence Project. I know.
Scare people into like.
Who's heard of the Innocence Project in the US? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
We've got DNA testing now. So a lot of crimes, there is collateral material where there is DNA material from the perpetrator. So they can go back and test the person who is cooling his heels in prison for maybe 25 years and find out if that person was actually the perpetrator. And in hundreds of cases, they found that it wasn't them. But here's the amazing thing. In 70% of the cases, they confessed. In something like 50% of the cases, there was an eyewitness ID.
Well, that proves that both of those are highly fallible. That's
And there was something...
We kind of know it with better.
And often there was a guilty plea as well.
Well, that's the lawyers decide
Yes.
in the US system.
So,
Open and shut case, and yet they're innocent.
yes, now, so I want to interpret, Bayes' now the point of Bayes' theorem is that if something's inherently very unlikely, you require strong evidence to overcome that unlikeliness. Or some people put it, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So
It's to do with the null hypothesis now.
yeah. Now, so if you take the example, so juries put great store on confessions, and they put great store on eyewitness identifications. So, given that the average person didn't commit any particular crime, and police are under great pressure to what's the term? Solve the case,
To resolve it.
Get a conviction.
get a result. So
they might get elected sheriff if they get a conviction.
that's right. You get promoted. You know, you have quotas and da da da. So evidence is only useful if the evidence would be different depending on the situation. So if you're guilty, the idea of the way juries think is, if a person's guilty, they will confess. Probably. If they're not guilty, they will not confess. Because I wouldn't
They won't
confess
confess if their name's
if I wasn't
not
guilty. Therefore, confession is distinguishes guilty people from not guilty people. However, studies show that you put someone with an experienced cop for a couple of days, they'll confess, even if they didn't do it. And we saw that with the Amanda Knox case. You see this all the time. Basically, the police can manipulate you mentally into confessing. So it actually is not true. And in fact, possibly they're more likely to confess if they're innocent because they're probably not a hardened criminal. You know, the first thing that any hardened criminal learns is when you're with the cops, keep your trap shut. Especially if you're innocent. The more you say, the more inconsistencies they can find, da 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 da. So confession, the point from the point of view of Bayes' law is that confession doesn't actually distinguish a guilty person from a not guilty person. It's potentially consistent with being guilty, but it doesn't distinguish the two cases. And a person's probably not guilty. So similarly with eyewitness identification, see, we sort of evolved in a hunter-gatherer society, 100 to 150 people. You knew everyone really well. You could identify who you saw, no problem. But when you extrapolate that to a society of millions of people and someone you saw fleetingly for 2 or 3 seconds across the dimly lit street, you've got no chance. And of course the police line up 6 people, only one of whom probably looks like the suspect, and they can give you subtle clues as to whether you're getting it right or not. So again, eyewitness ID doesn't distinguish a guilty person from a not guilty person very well. So in terms of moving a low probability to a high probability, these things don't actually carry the weight. Does that make sense? And guilty pleas, well, people plead guilty because they basically get told. Well, you can plead guilty and you get 2 years, or you can plead not guilty and you're probably found guilty and you get 15 years. So a lot of innocent people. And that sort of thing happens in Australia as well. So
You get pressured into making the eyewitness ID too.
yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
so-
definitely him you saw, wasn't it? I don't know. Could be. Looks like it.
All right, so if you're ever on a jury, just please bear these things, particularly if I'm on in the dock there. So now the one thing I'd like to draw out of this is that what people tend to do is they tend to come up with a theory, and then they look at the facts, and then they say, is the fact consistent with the theory? And if it's consistent with the theory, people tend to think of that as evidence for the theory. But in fact, evidence is only evidence for a theory if it's a distinction between the two situations. Does that make sense? So,
Not sure I understand what you're saying.
what I'm saying is, let's say, what's an example? There's some on the slides. Well, an example would be, say, confession. If someone's guilty, they should confess, you would think. And therefore, the fact they've confessed fits in with the theory of them being guilty. But what you need to say is, it's only evidence for them being guilty if they actually, if they're actually far more, more likely to confess if they're guilty. So, let me give you an example, all right? The Labor, I'm not particularly picking on Labor, I may go, well, they're all as liars and cheats, but when Labor got elected, they said they would balance the budget. And they've never balanced the budget since they got in, and it shows no signs of doing so. So, they obviously believe, a lot of people think it's important to balance the budget. So we could apply this sort of logic by saying, before the election, do they really intend to balance the budget? Now, if they do intend to balance the budget, then they will say they will. If they don't intend to balance the budget, they will also say they will, because they think people will vote for them only if they say. So in either case, they will actually say the same thing. We will balance the budget. Or the Liberals would, just to be even-handed, the Liberals would say, we will adopt a compassionate industrial relations policy towards workers. All right? So the fact that they say they will balance the budget actually provides you with no information. It doesn't actually cause you to update the original belief as to, or shouldn't, as to whether they actually will balance the budget. You need to look at other evidence, such as have they done this in the past or whatever. So that's an example where, you know, saying they will balance the budget is certainly consistent with the fact that they would balance the budget. But it actually doesn't provide you with any evidence whatsoever.
That's
that
why I
they would.
don't read mainstream media anymore, because it doesn't update my belief matrix.
And this plays into the human tendency to have this confirmation bias. Once you have a theory, you just filter the facts, you ignore facts that are not consistent, and any facts that are consistent with your theory tend to bolster your view that your theory is correct. So, all right, so that's, I think those are the key ideas. So this
That's
little...
why you've got to throw out all your theories every so often and start from scratch without any.
that's right. So, and review, and the key things here are facts need to be more than consistent with your theory. They need to distinguish one theory from another to be of any use, and to add to your beliefs.
I think people have a refutation bias too. They often don't see facts that disagree with their theory.
That's right. So you have this confirmation bias. You tend not to even see facts that conflict with your beliefs.
Refutation bias, I call that. Yeah, the other thing would be a bias away from refutation.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and if you're on a jury, bear those things in mind.
So
yes.
the general, what we're generally taking from Bayes' theory is a much greater dose of scepticism towards our instinctive or intuitive appreciation of the world.
So
Is that a fair summary?
Yes, and the key thing is to look at the base case.
Default or null? Or
Yeah. So the base case is, you know, politicians are liars. So it requires extraordinary evidence to actually... so the fact that they say something doesn't really tell you very much. And politicians generally, you know, what did the Liberals do? First thing they got control of the Senate? Draconian industrial relations legislation. What did Labor do when they got control of the Senate? Repealed it. So, you know, that's their base case, is they will behave according to how they want to behave. And you require a lot of evidence to sort of get over the base case. So always look at the base case. You know, you've got a 1% risk of cancer. And that should always be used. I mean, I remember when my mother died and my father died in 2003, my brothers said, oh, Mum's in a bad way, she's very upset and depressed, I don't reckon she'll last 2 years. I said, well, look, her life expectancy is about 11 years, so I reckon she'll probably last 11 years or so. And, you know, that was 8 years ago and she's still alive. So you should bias your thinking towards, you know, what's the base case, what's the average? You know, if I'm going to become an investor, I'll probably perform on average about as well as everyone else.
is the base case like the same as the null hypothesis? Or
The base case is what's the average, what's the normal situation here? You know, for example, if they've rounded up some random person as a suspect, the base case is they're probably not guilty. If you're just going in for a screening test, you probably haven't got a serious disease. So the base case is kind of the starting point.
Principle.
And then the evidence.
Principle
What
of
people,
mediocrity.
so you've got a sort of starting point, and you've got some evidence. So in the case of my mother, the starting point was she was 73 years old, and the evidence was she was depressed after Dad died. So people tend to really overweight the evidence and ignore the starting, the basic conditions. If that does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. So those are the. There is actually a mathematical formula that I need to know. So I might email it out. Can you email everyone? I'll send you some links as well. Okay, Bayes' theorem. Any other questions or comments?
Just think of too many examples.
Sorry?
I can think of too many examples.
Oh, it's just
This is
Do you
sort of-
think,
this is
do you
basically-
use Bayesian like probability to make average decisions in your daily life?
Oh, well, I used it a few weeks ago as you might recall. This is the other example.
Yeah,
Cold
Oh,
fusion.
this will go on for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
I'll put up the formula.
Low energy, nuclear.
Well, you can give them time.
How do you
So I'll get everyone to do
judge
their own
whether
numbers.
your priors are correct when you like the 1%, whether that's correct or not, if you've got cancer or...
Yeah, my only problem with all this is even bothering to give it a name like Bayesian, which is kind of is not at all explanatory.
Well, in science, they actually refer to the Bayesian revolution. But yeah, it's one of these mystifying terms.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it just, basic probability theory, that's all comes out anyway.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's not. I mean, there's no calculus. Sorry.
There is this equation. Helpful.
But how much of that's not derivable from standard
Oh,
probability?
it's
No, it's-
not, yeah, none of it.
It's very trite in a way, but in fact, it's massively different to how most people actually operate.
But it's very powerful.
Yeah, but that's why there's a gambling industry.
A what industry?
Gambling industry.
Oh, yeah.
It's just very different from human psychology. That's
Oh, yeah,
Psychology.
we are terrible at it.
Psychology and probability
So
are
that's
antithesis.
the actual formula. I will invite you all, if you've got a pen and paper, to just do your own. This is actually the formula. So the probability that cold fusion has actually come to pass, given the fact that somebody this year has claimed that he's
Right.
got something. I don't want to get into arguing about it, Rossi,
Yeah.
but anyway. So this is the formula. What it basically says is the probability of one thing given the other thing is the probability of the second thing given the first thing times the probability of the first thing over all this stuff. So I'll plug in the values that I think apply in this case. What is the probability that if someone has invented cold fusion that they'll claim that it's true? Probably 90%.
No.
What is the probability in a given year that someone will come up with something like cold fusion? A major innovation in energy.
This is what everybody argued about.
I'd say
100?
1%.
Yeah.
But you can plug in your own numbers.
I'd agree with that.
And then this first term here is the same thing again. And the probability of a claim given that that no one has invented cold fusion. Now, just this morning actually we got a story of another guy who's claimed another fabulous new energy source. So you see these claims about every 3 years or so, I claim. So I'd say there's probably about every 3 years somebody claims that they've come up with something. And the probability of not cold fusion would be 99%, which is the complement of that. So you work out that's about 0.9% on 0.9% plus 40% or something. So it goes to be roughly 2% or something. So because in my mind, cold fusion, it's very unlikely someone's come up with a fantastic new energy source this year. It requires extraordinary evidence to overcome that base fact, if you like. So basically, once you just get the formula and just plug in your numbers. Now, one of the limitations of Bayesianism is that when you're dealing with very complicated situations, like everything in AI, works great on toy problems. When you've got 100 variables, not so good. It becomes, it's an exponential complexity. Yeah.
Have you dropped everything now on the basis of that and now just analysing it? Because you're saying, remember, if cold fusion's true, that'll change everything, correct?
Yeah.
It's hugely significant.
Yes.
Right.
I'm still following the story.
Okay.
So this is the probability that happens. Now the other thing you need to consider in your life is, like, 2% doesn't sound like much, but a 2% chance of saying your house burning down is enough to pay hundreds of dollars every year for house
Oh,
insurance.
no, 0. How many, there's about probably less than 100 house fires a year in Melbourne,
Oh, really?
out of a million. So
Okay.
there's a 1 in 10,000 chance of your house burning down.
Oh, so this is how the insurance industry makes money out of their gambling.
Right, well, yeah, now given that,
Okay.
that's very good.
Paying pensions.
We spend X $100 a year, all of us, on insuring our houses.
The insurance companies make huge profits.
This is going to be, this is much
Let's
more
get back on
significant.
track.
We should be spending, every one of us should be spending hundreds of dollars to investigate this.
Investigate what?
So this is where you get into the situation of low probability, high impact events.
Yeah.
So you need to take into account not just the probability, but the impact.
Well,
And if they're high enough impact and low enough probability, the insurance people won't insure you
But
anyway.
isn't
Correct.
it the case that given the health insurance
No,
or
we
the
won't
car
give
insurance,
flood
whichever one you
insurance.
want to do,
Yeah.
given the probability of your car accident, you are now should be allocating more resources to analysing this cold fusion thing than you are to
so in other words, you're
insuring your car.
proving the opposite of
Based on your
statistics.
maths.
Mm.
You should be giving more money to this than you do to your car insurance. Do you?
Well, I pay as little as I possibly can for the
Yeah,
car insurance. I have a cheap car and I only have third
That's
party.
evading the question.
I mean, I had this argument. I had
The cheapest car insurance is I'll own a bomb and not worry about it.
No, because actually in the
You're gonna
case
get
of cold
hard-
fusion, I don't think it will make
you
the
get
slightest
somewhere
difference
else.
whether I pay attention or not.
This is actually-
Whether it comes through or
Best
not.
way of
No,
insuring your
that's
car
not
is
true.
not
You
to have
could be
one.
putting that money on the share market.
True.
You could be positioning yourself, saying,
Well,
oh,
I
I'm
actually
going to
know.
have nickel
Did
spreads.
you know, James? Actually, I made the comment to James that one way of testing whether cold
Or leave it home.
markets tend to know stuff that other people don't know earlier than other people know. And did you know the price of coal has fallen by 30% in the last few months?
Yes.
Fallen.
Yeah, but
Fallen.
that could be just to do with China.
So
you
that's
know,
one thing. I
whatnot.
said I would watch the price of coal because if the price of coal plummets, actually it could have a huge impact on Australia. Because there goes our
One about it.
half our economy.
Oh, no, it's not that big. I mean, one of the things people, this Bayesian
Take
argument
coal.
has,
Yeah.
has a huge impact on the global warming scenario, which is I think a highly applicable to the Bayesian treatment, because particularly the concept of catastrophic climate change. No, I think most people who study it realise that moderate climate change is something that might be adaptable to, but catastrophic climate change is possible extinction
Yeah.
event, right?
Yeah.
And so therefore, and someone was saying, well, we only have 2% of emissions, so it won't make much of a difference. And I made the argument, if you had a 100 chamber revolver, and someone said play Russian roulette,
Yeah, sure.
right? Would you mind if someone pumped an extra 2 rounds in it? I'd say you'd be highly keen to get those 2 rounds out of there, because given that it's an extinction event that you're dealing with,
Well,
then,
I think that even with the likely scenario is likely to result in the deaths of hundreds of millions of people with global warming. I mean, I think global warming is a serious man-made problem we need to do something about. I don't think the Labor Party's exercise in income redistribution
Oh.
is again, I did the
but
calculation.
anyway, but I'm saying that Bayesian
But
treatment might have
Actually,
less
I'll tell
probability.
you, one aspect of Bayesianism is that if there is something which threatens corporate profits, the chance that corporations will conduct a misinformation campaign against that knowledge is 100%. So the fact that there is a massive PR campaign, there are various scientists who've been employed as stooges and blah blah blah, all this noise about global warming not being proven tells you absolutely nothing, because it would happen whether it was true or not. It tells you
Well, how would a
nothing.
Bayesian treat global warming? Could you plug in values there using your formula then? Or?
Yeah, you could. It doesn't matter what your priors are. You can plug anything into Bayesian.
So you need to be honest. I mean, if someone pointed out, you can apply, you can use a formula and put in the wrong numbers.
No, what could you put in plausible numbers there?
Well, we're saying the probability, say, that global warming is true, given that 99% of scientists reputable scientists in the field claim that it's true.
Okay, James, you're up.
Ian, what do you think?
You'd have to go back.
What about 300-year storms in the last 2 years in Melbourne?
So you'd have to go and look at.
Okay.
Has there ever been a case where 99% of scientists have said something is the case and it's not been the case?
That's right. You have to go back and look and see what does that
But,
mean.
yeah.
Yeah, they say consciousness is a hard problem.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
So anyway, thank you very much, Tim.
Thanks.